In the summer of 1936, the Second Spanish Republic erupted in flames. Brothers turned on brothers, and neighborhoods burned to the ground in the flames of revolution and combat. Urban factories had become fortresses, conquered towns turned into communes, and the red and black banner of the anarchists and syndicalists of Spain flew over Barcelona's beaten and broken streets. Behind the imagery of what would go down in history as the Spanish Civil War lay a story that few truly know, a story of rebellion and defiance stretching back a generation before the first shots of the Civil War were ever fired. The day was November 1st, 1910. A labor union which went by the name of Workers' Solidarity, or Solidaridad Obrero, had called for a national congress. Worker solidarity had belonged to a long labor tradition within Spain, stretching back far into the mid-1800s, influenced in large part by radical anarchist theorists such as Miguel. On that day of November 1st of 1910, amid Barcelona's fading Belle Epoque splendor, 96 labor organizations gathered in the Palace of Fine Arts. The reason that this syndical congress had been called by Workers' Solidarity was to organize a new labor confederation for all of Spain, not hampered by the reform-minded socialism of Spain's older unions such as the General Union of Workers, also known as the UGT. For this purpose, the Congress of November 1910 saw the foundation of the National Confederation of Workers, or the CNT. The CNT's founding principles included the abolition of piecework, the promotion of the 8-hour workday, full pay and labor rights for women, as well as an unrelinquishable demand for direct democracy and worker self-management through labor unions. In its earliest days, the CNT was but a modest confederation, with, of course, less than 100 societies, 46 formal affiliations, and about 26,500 members. The founding Congress was attended by a notable Spanish Freemason, Anselmo Lorenzo Asperilla, then known as the grandfather of Spanish socialism, emerging from the Masonic lodge known as the Sons of Labor. The foundation of the CNT had been inspired by Lorenzo, who had, for the entire year before the CNT's founding Congress, been pressuring for Spanish anarchists and syndicalists to join together to form a united front for the workers of Spain. Yet in the ensuing decade, its ranks swelled. Due to the CNT's failed declaration of a general strike for 1911, the Spanish government outlawed the Confederation, suppressing it for 2 years until the year of 1913. During the First World War, the CNT grew explosively, especially in Catalonia as industrial output boomed and labor unrest spread rapidly. The CNT's growth accelerated throughout its mass strikes across Catalonia, most notably its partial participation in Spain's 1917 general strike, called by the UGT, as well as its 1919 La Canadensa strike, which paralyzed the industrialists of Barcelona and Catalonia. By 1919, the CNT's membership had soared to 700,000, and its organizational model, federating workers' unions on the basis of trade, provincial plenaries, and direct action committees, had become a shining star of solidarity between the anarchists and the syndicalists of Spain. The victories of the CNT in its 1919 strike forced the Spanish government to concede to an 8-hour industry workday, one of the first of such laws anywhere around the world, though until 1922 the Confederation itself largely labored underground, clandestinely. It was in this clandestinity that the CNT's leadership took a new turn of uncompromising direct action. Employers and the state retaliated against the CNT by unleashing armed thugs to break strikes and assassinate union leaders across the nation, and the union responded in kind with assassinations of employers and police in Catalonia. Notably, in 1922, the CNT joined the newly formed International Workers' Association in Berlin. And then came the infamous night of September 13th, 1923, when under the cover of darkness, a military revolution led by Spanish General Miguel Primo de Rivera overthrew the liberal constitutional Spanish government. At first, CNT militants flew into hiding, disappearing from public entirely. Union halls stood empty, anticipating military closure. Union life came to a complete halt. All of the CNT across Spain anticipated unprecedented repression by the new military government. And yet, none of this came to pass. In the words of Angel Maria de Lara, astonishingly, the new regime seemed to have forgotten the CNT and the anarchists. After a few days, they disappeared, reappeared, and though the unions never fully regained their previous vigor, dues collection resumed. And so, regional plenaries in Mataró, Granollers, and Sabadell between late 1923 to mid-1924 saw the rise of the most uncompromising anarchist faction within the CNT, a faction which decried any union negotiations with the new regime of General Miguel Primo de Rivera as a betrayal of the working class. Rivera had demanded that the Confederation submit statutes, membership lists, and accounts, as the new government was apparently, as it seems, hoping to integrate them into the new regime as a syndical representative. The stubborn nature of the anarchist militants, however, brought the CNT into conflict with General Rivera, who was forced to raid CNT halls and exile some of its disruptive leaders. The CNT's anarchists had forced the hand of the state against them, with figures such as Buenaventura Durruti and Francisco Ascaso robbing banks across Spain, such as the Savings Bank of Terrassa, the Padrón Bank in Manresa, the Fonda de Francia opposite the civil government in Barcelona, the Madrid branch of the Bank of Spain, and the Bank of Spain in Gijón. Then the anarchists attacked the Atarazanas barracks and raided through Vera del Bidasoa. Spain's prisons were filled with anarchists. The anarchists of the CNT were behaving completely erratically without vision, tact, or reason, placing, in the words of Maria de Lera, demagogy and utopian demands above the real objective interests of the working class. This caused the arrest and imprisonment of key CNT leaders such as the revolutionary syndicalist Angel Pestana. Many of these leaders even disavowed the infantile behavior of the anarchist militants, and yet due to their leadership status, they were arrested nonetheless. On May 4th of 1924, a group of anarchist militants assassinated the brand new executioner of Barcelona, Rogelio Perez, as he left his home on Riereta Street. This was the final straw, resulting in the outlawing of the CNT that same month. CNT leader Angel Pestana would remain imprisoned for only 2 years until his release on parole in 1926. After this point, Pestana, recognizing that collaboration with the brand new civil directory of Miguel Primo de Rivera offered to the Spanish proletariat the chance of a united workers' front, he abandoned the CNT's hardline insurrectionist bent and began arguing for a far more pragmatic and forward-thinking approach to the regime of Rivera: collaboration. Despite the regime's harsh crackdown against the CNT in 1924, the organization's networks across Catalonia, Aragon, Valencia, and elsewhere persisted. Oftentimes, the state, for some reason, seemed more on the defensive than on the offense against the anarchist militants. It would be from out of this context that by 1927, two currents had prevailed within the CNT. First, there were the pure anarchists, who advocated for spontaneism, direct sabotage, and insurrection as the sole path to proletarian liberation. Then there were the Syndicalists, headed by Angel Pestana and Juan Pero, the former of which advocated for a structured and disciplined labor federation, a mass movement of syndicalism, and incremental economic conquest through collective action within the context of the present state of affairs under the civil directory of Miguel Primo de Rivera. In 1927, an explicitly anarchist organization, the Iberian Federation of Anarchists, or the FAI for short, arose to connect with the CNT and attempt to push it further into extreme insurrection. From its inception, the FAI's mission was clearly to prevent the CNT from ever drifting into cooperation with the regime of Rivera, which had made positive connections with the Syndicalists of Spain's General Union of Workers. In other words, the FAI intended to force the CNT to stay on its anarchist path, effectively prohibiting Pestana's syndicalist vision of regime collaboration from being able to ever take place. Well-known Spanish militants, including Buenaventura Durruti, Juan Garcia Oliver, Federica Montseny, and others, joined the FAI, which quietly infiltrated the leadership of the CNT as well as its local committees at every level. The FAI's rise crystallized the already growing divide within the CNT. On one side were the anarchist purists, anti-reformists, anti-statist radicals. On the other side were the disciplined syndicalists who demanded more reasonable engagement with Spain's conditions. The syndicalists favored the continuation of building stronger industrial unions, negotiating wages and hours, and legally registering under the new regime's laws in order to protect the Spanish proletariat. Thus, the 1920s seemed to be coming to a close, with the CNT internally split. The leader of the syndicalist faction, Angel Pestana, had laid out his proposals in 1927, which included gaining legal recognition from General Rivera's directory and advocating for the CNT's participation in the elections of the National Corporative Organization, which Spain's General Union of Workers had already been participating in. This would help in giving the CNT real national legitimacy and the ability to affect national economic policy through the syndical organs of the National Corporative Organization. Pestana argued that a collaboration with the General Union of Workers, which was already participating in this new corporatist economic structure, would ultimately help in uniting the workers further against the bourgeoisie, which also had representation in the Directory's National Corporative Organization. Pestana and his colleague Juan Pero recognized a basic fact that the anarchists' bomb-throwing and unregulated uprisings had done nothing constructive for anybody. What the CNT needed to do next was register local CNT unions under the regime's corporative statutes and focus, for the time being, on ensuring proper settlements for workers' wages, hours, and the collective management of services. These proposals ran headlong into the purism of the anarchists, and the disagreement ultimately resulted in the removal of the CNT's National Committee. Following the fall of Miguel Primo de Rivera in the wake of the Great Depression, Spain's General Berenguer took the helm. Berenguer wrote From the earliest weeks of our administration, the Syndicalists, the CNT, sought contact with the government in order to voice their grievances and express their desire to normalize relations, to rejoin normal and regulated civic life, emerging from the clandestinity that they had been forced into, due to not being recognized by the state. In this spirit, the two principal leaders of these organizations, Pestana and Pero, visited me in Madrid. The CNT was legalized in May of 1930, though as it became apparent that the regime's continuity would be impossible in the face of the new Republican, Socialist, and Communist uprisings, the CNT joined the ranks of the revolution against the Spanish government. Following Angel Pestana's visit with Prime Minister Berenguer, Pestana followed up in a meeting with military official General Emilio Mola, denouncing the joint committees of the regime and refusing to adhere to any of Mola's requests. During the collapse of the Civil Directory as it was unfolding in 1930, Angel Pestana, among others, defended the need to consolidate a new republic in which syndical activity could be carried out freely and independently for the time being. Pestana understood that Spain was, at the moment, still a backward country with still some feudal characteristics and strong clientelist relations. Therefore, he advocated for a transitional period where Spain would turn into a federal socialist republic, where the syndicates would have heavy amounts of power within the economy and political life. With the birth of the Second Spanish Republic following the collapse of the Civil Directory and the ousting of the king in 1931, Angel Pestana and his partner Juan Pero authored the Manifesto of the 30, advocating tactical restraint and rejecting the concept of an immediate insurrection. The Anarchist Federation retaliated. Throughout 1932, dozens of Treantistas, as they were called, were expelled from the CNT after pointing out that the anarchists of the Iberian Federation of Anarchists in the higher ranks of the CNT were causing its downfall, as since 1931 the FAI had effectively taken over all meaningful power within the Confederation. The CNT, even from the start, gave the new Second Spanish Republic only tepid support, as most FAI members distrusted the state and remained more interested in immature agitation. In January of 1932, the CNT-FAI organized the Alt Llobregat strike in Catalonia, with miners and workers briefly taking over towns. The following year, a new nationwide uprising occurred with bombs and barricades across Catalonia, Andalusia, and elsewhere, only to be brutally suppressed by the state. Soon after the Casas Viejas incident, in which civil guards murdered rural CNT anarchists with their families, the Syndicalists' breakaway from the CNT became formal with the foundation of the Libertarian Syndicalist Federation under Pestana's leadership, as other opposition syndicates formed affiliated with Pestana and his associates rather than with the CNT. The split between the CNT and the Syndicalists would leave the Confederation firmly under FAI influence for the next few years to come. On February 28th of 1934, Angel Pestana met with rising Falange leader José Antonio Primo de Rivera. The two met at Barcelona's Glaciar restaurant, privately discussing social revolution. The young Falange leader had approached the infamous labor organizer due to the recommendation of Benito Mussolini, who recognized that the Falange needed a man of the people. The facilitation of this meeting had been conducted through the Falangist brother of Buenaventura Durruti, named Marciano Pedro Durruti, who had previously attempted to establish a meeting between the Falangist Rivera and Buenaventura of the CNT in a bid to make an alliance between the two, though this meeting never came to fruition. Pestana had accepted the meeting with Rivera out of sheer curiosity, utterly intrigued by the beliefs of the young leader. Eyewitness accounts reveal that the meeting took on a cordial atmosphere. The two men asked the others to leave them alone and emerged, from Rivera's perspective, agreeing on nearly 90% of their platform. In retrospect, however, Pestana concluded on the meeting by stating, "We were speaking entirely different languages. We parted ways with a bit more understanding of each other. I think José Antonio Primo de Rivera is an intelligent young man, perhaps even well-meaning, but he has no clear ideas. As for what he thought of me, I do not know, but I hope he understands that we are separated by too many irreconcilable differences in every respect to ever coincide politically, no matter how much goodwill either of us might have had." Ángel María de Lara, in his 1978 biography on Pestana, would state, "In Pestana's account, in his words and in his voice, I noticed no trace of disdain, nor, of course, of admiration. There was respect, and perhaps a faint feeling of disappointment or frustration at not having been able to dissuade him, Rivera, from his intentions." April 7th of 1934, Pestana founded the Syndicalist Party. Facing Spain's national, political, and economic ruin, the Syndicalist Party called for the people, including industrial and agricultural workers, technicians, intellectuals, and scientists, to mobilize towards a social revolution. The foundations of the new order would be worker syndicates, which would organize production, cooperatives, which would manage the distribution of wealth, and the municipalities, which would exist as the political expression of the social transformation. In the end, the bourgeoisie state was to be replaced with a confederation of Spanish municipalities, in other words, a state intended to coordinate the economic economic, cultural, and political life of the country under the direction of both workers and producers. Expropriated lands were to become properties of the municipalities or the state, which would in turn lease them for cultivation to the syndicates or groups of peasants. Throughout this, it was proposed that individual use of land be respected. All branches of production, factories, workshops, offices, and every form of industrial activity were to be managed by the syndicates. In each workplace, manual workers and technicians would jointly, and in agreement with higher economic coordination bodies, replace the old economic model with a more efficient organization. More importantly, the existing parliament was to be transformed into a chamber of labor, open only to delegates from workers' syndicates, cooperatives, professional guilds, and the municipalities. And as all Spaniards are equal, the Syndicalist Party concluded that all Spaniards must perform a useful economic function, producing at least as much as they consume, as the right to consume carries with it the duty to labor. During the Spanish Civil War, Angel Pestana's Syndicalist Party saved the lives of numerous Phalangists, issuing false membership cards to imprisoned Phalange members so they could escape Madrid prison. When the nationalist military coup against the Republic erupted on July 17, 1936, the CNT once again took center stage in a social revolution. In Barcelona, anarchists seized factories, collectivized services, and rewrote society entirely. Red and black banners flew over Spain's municipal buildings and communal bakeries, while the word comrade had become a form of universal address. The CNT ministers in Largo Caballero's government, such as Juan Garcia Oliver, Juan Pero, Frederica Montseny, and Juan Lopez, found cooperation with the socialists and Republicans as a mixed blessing. Frederica Montseny, as health minister, launched public health campaigns, while her colleagues in industry and supplies mobilized resources for troops and civilians. The syndicalist wing again clashed with the Iberian Anarchist Federation's purists, who denied any cooperation. While factories and workshops were taken over by their workers, farms and rural estates were run by local committees. By late 1936, an estimated 50 to 66% of arable land in Republican Spain had been seized by peasant and union committees. One study noted that in Catalonia, the figure was as high as 75% of the local economy run under worker control. In Aragon, the CNT's militias established defense committees and voluntary land collectivizations. The establishment of the Aragon Regional Defense Council in December of 1936, recognized by the Republican government, marked the apex of anarcho-syndicalist aspirations. The Defense Council was the first autonomous Aragonese government since 1707. Run initially by anarchist CNT members, the Defense Council immediately centralized price controls, attempting to curb inflation and ensure food distribution while stabilizing wages. Under CNT-FAI stewardship, entire industries were reorganized as worker co-ops. In Catalonia, the Generalitat, with CNT backing, issued a decree on October 24th of 1936 requiring that all firms with over 100 employees be converted to worker-controlled collectives. Smaller workshops were encouraged to join these collectives or be liquidated. Indeed, the CNT's committees swiftly closed hundreds of inefficient small shops. In Barcelona, they shut down 905 tiny barbershops and beauty salons, consolidating workers into just 212 larger, safer shops. Many bankrupt factories were merged into well-equipped mills. Productivity soared under this rational wartime planning. The CNT-FAI freely set up hospitals, schools run by syndicalist commissions, and implemented free love and gender equality. The feminist group Mujeres Libres grew to 30,000 members around 1936, educating women and liberating them from the expectations of a conservative Spain. But within months, partisan divisions and pressures from communist-led brigades such as the Lister's 11th Division saw the council's dissolution in August of 1937. Wartime pressures had driven deep rifts between the various factions of the anti-Francoist forces. On the war front, CNT-FAI militias held off the forces of the Spanish general in battles such as Madrid during the winter of 1936-37, after sending Buenaventura Durruti's column to the capital. By May of 1937, the rival communist and anarchist factions came to blows in the infamous Barcelona May Days. Clashes erupted between anarchist and POUM workers' committees and the government-backed militia of the communists and socialists. Ultimately, the CNT-FAI surrendered control of Barcelona's telephone exchange and police to the state, and agreed to, for the time being, sack their revolutionary agenda in favor of a centralized war front. The government had now outlawed many of the peasants' communes, which refused to cooperate with official supplies, and FAI members had been largely purged from local Republican administrations. Most of the anarchist collectives were either rolled back or subordinated to the state by late 1937. In other words, the revolution had collapsed before the conservative forces had even finished conquering Spain. The triumph of the dictator Francisco Franco against Republican forces in April of 1939 spelled out the CNT's formal outlawing under Decree 108 and the Unification Decree. Its assets, such as real estate, vehicles, collectivized enterprises, and its archives were all confiscated. All leftist unions were outlawed by 1939. Both the anarchists and the syndicalist movements of Spain were completely destroyed. Thousands of anarchists were executed or jailed, while union assets, real estate, and archives were confiscated by the state. Surviving CNT militias scattered across Europe and the Americas. In exile across France, Mexico, Argentina, and elsewhere, CNT members reassembled clandestinely, publishing underground newsletters and organizing new unions. By the end of the 1930s, nearly all of the major figures of the CNT had died. Buenaventura Durruti had been killed during the Battle of Madrid on November 20th of 1936. Francisco Ascaso had died months earlier during the Battle of Barcelona. Angel Pestana had died in 1937 from illness. Juan Pero was executed by firing squad in 1942 for his role as a CNT minister, despite testimonies by Falangist leaders such as Luis Santa Marina, who attempted to save him from execution. In 1945, the exiled CNT joined the Spanish socialists and communists in forming the Spanish Republican government in exile in Mexico. The CNT itself remained split between varying exiled factions. Some worked in labor councils abroad, others maintained Catholic syndicalist alliances through unions such as the Workers' Brotherhood of Catholic Action or the Federation of Churches of Liberty to appeal to religious workers. Other CNT members still plotted more revolutionary action, as in 1961 the CNT helped to form an interior defense group against Francisco Franco's dictatorship. Franco's death in November of 1975 brought Spain to the brink of democracy. Unlike the socialist and communist unions, the new CNT, led by a new generation, refused any compromise with the emergent political system. National Confederation leaders declared they would not participate in any elections, accept any state funding, or sit on any works councils. The new CNT refused to recognize labor elections, accept government subsidies, or allow for any other path than a return to grassroots, direct democratic union organization. The contemporary CNT of today was indeed reborn, but it wasn't the same and never would be ever again. The old federations no longer existed. Today's CNT remains a nebulous, decentralized network of local unions and assemblies who refuse to ally with any political party or to moderate their aims. The CNT today is in the order of only tens of thousands of members, maybe about 50,000, a drop in the bucket compared to the millions of unionized Spanish workers. Though the CNT will never again be what it once was, it leaves us with important lessons through both its successes and its countless failings, which can inform and educate the generations of labor leaders to come.